It's Thursday.
I know, it's weird.
What's so quiet, is it?
Well, it was not quiet earlier today.
Oh.
Mhm.
It's a really
Wild.
nice day. It was a nice.
Mhm.
I'm still riding a high from the graduation. That was, oh, just,
Yeah, I heard it was amazing.
oh, it was so. Just my face was numb from smiling.
Then
Oops,
talked
I don't
to
want to
him
do
today,
that.
Oh, you did, okay.
And he was just like, we're gonna have to talk more, it's obviously it's past, right, when it was COVID, and
Yeah.
so like just about maybe a dinner or something to like.
Yeah,
just, like
sorry.
host,
Yeah,
but to celebrate it, because there were a lot of retirees here today that
Yeah.
would be there, so.
yeah.
Yeah, so we chatted, he said, "I've got the time to talk about it," and I said, well, I want to make sure I found you, and he just laughed. So yeah, it was
Yeah.
good. So we'll plan something.
Hi, Nami.
Oops,
Like back in 2007.
He was the first teacher. right?
that was
Right?
Denise's baby, just. in
Was,
case.
I didn't know.
Well,
think
and,
that's what he said.
well, no, and
Yeah,
Dick
Yeah.
Anschutz was still teaching at the time, so, but Dick's not around anymore.
All right, let's do this. It's 5:35. I've not heard from Carla, but we do have a quorum. Starts at 6:30. Oh no, that does not. Did I notice it? No, it says 5:30. Just letting Carla know. Okay, we'll call the meeting to order. I'll do roll call. Karen Carnwell, present. Ben Lynn.
Here.
Daniel Bailey is here. Carla Pennington Cross and Andrew Franklin are absent. Stand for the pledge of allegiance if you'd like. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we'll move on to agenda approval. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second? Second. All right, any objections to approving the agenda? All right, we're gonna move it. We're gonna pass it through unanimous consent. All right, open enrollment policy language. This is a discussion item.
Yes, so you'll see attached the current open enrollment policy. I know that we're still in a little bit of flux around how we're gonna be moving forward with policy work, but we know that the open enrollment policy is one that is in updating. And there are some language pieces, we talked about it a little bit in the past, about the difference between preference and guaranteed and some of the current policy processes that we have in place around open enrollment. So Kayla graciously offered to join us because she's been working on open enrollment for 3 years?
Since COVID.
Since COVID. Just to share so that when we get to the space where we're reviewing those policies, we've got a little bit of background to make some decisions on which language we want to use.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm gonna share information about the language, the numbers for tuition waiver and open enrollment, so you can more fully understand when you're making the decision. The policy needs to be in place by January, because in January is when you vote on the how many seats you're going to have available, and so the way that the language is written by the state is that all of the policies have to be in place at that time. I started during COVID, and because everything was shut down, I was working, but I had a lot of time to just do all of the trainings on DPI. So some of the stuff that I had shared with you were just a couple of the pages of the trainings in regards to preference versus guarantee. So I'll start with tuition waiver, just because tuition waiver leads into the open enrollment seats. Currently, the form is extremely confusing. Parents have a very hard time, so I fill it out for them. There's 3 different sections depending on when you move. So if a student were to move now, the district has a choice whether or not we would grant them.
Sorry, could you back up and explain what tuition waiver is?
Okay.
Just so I have a,
Okay,
Context.
so if you live in the district and you move out, you can apply for tuition waiver, allowing you to continue in the school district for the rest of the school year.
okay,
So depending on when you move. So there's 3 different sections in there. So if a student has moved after February 7th, I try to find out, anytime the staff mails something home and it comes back, no longer there, I'll call the families and say, okay, we've got something we can do so your student can continue here. I need to know your move date, and I need to know your new address. So there's 3 different sets of dates. If they move after February 7th and before July 1st, they could do what's called an additional year tuition waiver, but it's not required for us to grant them. If
under
they,
current policy language or just statutory?
this is state law.
Okay, got
And
it.
it says on the form, it's up to the district whether or not you want to do it. If they move prior to September 29th, but after July 1st, again, it's an additional year tuition waiver, but it's up to the district if we want to grant it. If they move after September 29th, then they've been enrolled for 20 days. We don't have a choice. We have to grant the tuition waiver to allow them to continue for the rest of the school year. So I'll give you, this is the form. It
Okay.
changes every year. The dates on it change every year, but I'm pretty sure that's next school year's. So the families, I fill it out, I send it to them electronically to sign. Allison signs it, they get a copy. And they're made aware at that point in time, they have to transport their children. We don't do transportation for anybody who's outside of the district. So that runs us into that open enrollment.
Could we pause? for one
Absolutely,
moment?
absolutely.
Do any of you guys have questions about that piece?
Yeah, this is a stupid question, but it's because of property tax. Is that why it's called tuition waiver? Is there?
Yes, it's because of the cost for school.
So,
Once it's approved,
Yeah.
I send a letter to the parents and I send the form to the parents. I also have to send it to the school district that they're from. Because on there, it asks what your new resident district is. So I send a copy to MPS and we have to have checked, is it a current year, is it an additional year?
Yeah.
Because all of that affects what Lindsay does.
and the reason the dates seem a little off is because it's property taxes for the calendar year, not the school year. So that's why it's like September 29th versus.
No, September 29th is that they've been in school for 20 days.
Okay.
So
okay.
it's the current school year.
And then we.
Third Friday.
So-
I think I get what you're saying. So
Yeah.
you're talking about the property tax as when we set the levy in October. So
Yeah.
that's why the timeline, it would be before October when we set the property tax levy. And that's also when we also figure out what we're going to do.
So that probably does fit.
So that, okay.
And the tuition waiver, just another probably basic question, means that we're not gonna ask wherever they move to, their new resident district to pay.
Right.
They pay us, or they pay the state, they pay?
They don't.
They don't pay, they pay, but doesn't like, if you're open enrolled, that district
Open
pays-
enrollment money, we get money, correct.
We
And,
get-
and
okay.
we also are not charging the family. You can continue in our district and we're not going to charge you.
Is there an option where a family can continue, but you can charge them?
Actually,
Yeah.
yes. There is.
Oh, is that a statute, under a statute, or is that a?
I believe so.
My old
Interesting.
district, we did do that for families.
How does that affect state aid with numbers?
So when we are doing our enrollment and our membership count, that's part of the piece that we have to report is how many tuition waivers and how many out. And
Oh.
also factoring in the local, which is open enrollment and open enrollment.
Yeah.
Because to your point, we get money for the students that are open enrolling in and not out.
Right. Okay, okay, thank you. Sorry, this is a-
Yeah, No, just, I've got everything, so just tell me to stop.
That's okay. I just want to make sure we understand before we go. So we're
Totally okay. I've done such a deep dive into it the last couple of years. So, and actually I learned something prepping this for tonight as well, so I was kind of surprised. So our current open enroll wording is, okay, for open enrollment, you either have to give a preference or you have to guarantee to currently attending students and their siblings. So our current policy for siblings is that we give them preference. That means that this year we had a whole bunch of people that applied for, we only had 10 open enrollment seats in K-5. 6 of those seats went to siblings. You know, the siblings come in, they went right to the top of my list, they're automatically granted that seat. So when I did the blind draw, which I do through Excel, I only drew for 4 seats.
Okay.
And then I put everybody else in order for the wait list.
Okay.
Our current policy for currently attending students is that we guarantee a seat for them to continue. So, and I believe probably the reason we've done that in the past is we have families who've been in the district, you know, since they're in 6th grade. You know, they've been here since they were in kindergarten, and you want them to be able to finish out. So, we had only 10 K-5 seats available, and we did not offer any seats in SPED this year. But I gave out 12 seats to currently attending students, and 5 of those went to SPED students. So we actually granted 22 seats this
Which
year.
is part of the law, as I understand it, the statutory laws that you
We can
guarantee it, that includes.
Right,
the language
right,
is
right,
good.
right,
Yeah.
yes, yes. If it's guaranteed, it doesn't matter if they're SPED or not, but you could change the language to preference.
So I'm sorry, how many were sped this year?
This year, we gave out 10 seats to currently attending, 5 were SPED. Last year, we gave out 11 seats, 6 were SPED.
6 of the K-5 students of the 10 seats were sibling preferences.
Correct.
So you might
And
have,
we had siblings apply in other grades as well, but because we didn't have seats, those automatically got denied.
That's open enrollment seats.
No, I mean, we did, but we just did kindergarten this year.
So by not doing that, we did.
Ayla, could you review how we get to 22 again?
We offered 10 K-5 seats.
Right.
I had 12 currently attending students that because of our language, we had.
okay, so sorry. So
No, that's
you may
okay.
have said this, but so if like, let's say someone's in 6th grade, they apply for the tuition waiver, they get it, and they're in 7th grade for the full year. But then are they
They're guaranteed through 8th grade. Once
Okay.
we give them the open enrolled seat, they're guaranteed through 8th grade. They could lose it
But-
because of attendance or expulsion.
But then they get the open enrolled, so 1 year it's a tuition rate waiver, and
The next year, yeah, so I track it within Infinite Campus, our database, and I've got to switch it from tuition.
So it's just a
waiver
1 year thing,
to, yeah, it is a
Okay.
1-year situation.
got it.
But they could be in kindergarten, get a tuition waiver for 1st grade, and then they are now guaranteed open enrollment.
Great, great,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
So actually, of our 102 students that we have this year, we had 102 open enrollment. 37 of those students were from tuition waivers. So they had gone from a tuition waiver to a guaranteed open enrollment seat. And
So they would be a tuition waiver for 1 year.
of the 37 students, I've got the
Okay.
printout here.
37
Over,
carried
yeah,
over
I'll get
as-
37 have carried over.
That's
Yeah, and of those 37, 17 of them went from their first year of enrolled to tuition waiver in that first year. So we had,
one more time.
so we had 17 of those 37 students moved into the district and tuition waived the first year. So, I mean, some of them within 2 months.
They moved in, they moved out.
Yep.
Or for the rest of it.
So then they're guaranteed all the way through.
So there's a system and they're utilizing the system that's currently available.
So they, I mean, some of them as early, we had 2 kids who tuition waived in early childhood. So they were special ed kids, tuition waived in early childhood, we're guaranteeing them all the way through childhood program for attracting.
Being known for being good. There's a pro, right? We're looking at policy JECB, that's our current policy. policy, the one that's attached. Where is this guarantee language? I was looking through it and I
Well,
thought I saw preference.
There's preference for siblings, but the other thing is, since I started in this, I've been asking to get the language updated because we don't.
But where is the guarantee in this policy?
I don't tuition waiver, I'm looking for.
So for the continuing students, like.
Yeah, well, so you have to, in your policy, you have to designate guarantee or preference. When I searched for the word guarantee in this document, I didn't see it. When I searched for the word preference under item, I believe it's 1C, it says the board will fill the available spaces by random selection, provided that that preference will be given to non-resident pupils already attending and their siblings and siblings of pupils chosen during the random selection process. So that I thought was preference. But I know that you guys are saying we are doing a guarantee, so I'm looking for the guarantee in the policy.
And what weight
Yeah, I
does
didn't
preference
like
have?
You didn't see it either? Preference is, well, it sounds like a preference is almost an automatic guarantee if you're at the top and there's space. But
Yeah, if
preference,
there's
if
the
you
space issue.
preference, if you don't have space, means we don't have to accept you,
So if there's space, it's guaranteed.
essentially.
Well,
Unless
one,
there's,
in the 25 years I've been here, there was 1 year where we had one more student than we had K-5 kids. And
So-
that one sibling, one more sibling than we had K-5 seats, and that sibling did not get in.
Got it. So, okay.
But if we use the term guarantee,
Then
then
no
it's
matter
not
the
dependent
space-
on the number of seats.
Well, and that's something that I learned this year. I know, I know
one,
it's in there.
one of the options in the statute though, that I thought seemed like maybe is a compromise is that you can use the words may or shall. So if you use the words may.
That's what I learned this year.
If you use the words may, then every year the board can determine if it's a preference or a guarantee. So you could ask for the relevant information to determine, I don't know, financial impact of space, right?
You can't change it to preference. You can either say you can say we are going to guarantee. If you say may, you can say in January, yes, we're gonna guarantee, or no, we're not.
Okay, so if you
can't
say, no, we're not gonna guarantee, what prevents you from still giving a preference to siblings? Oh, it has to be random then. And
It is- it
everyone
was-
goes
if-
into it
if-
random?
If we go to preference, if we go to preference for currently attending, the currently attending and siblings in that grade are equally weighted.
Okay.
So when I blind draw, I could choose 3 siblings and
Yeah,
not
that was
choose 2 currently attending students.
Okay, but again, I'm just trying to find the guarantee language in our current policy, or is there another policy?
It was in here, I don't know.
Do Control F.
I did, I
Yeah,
did.
she
did.
Oh,
JDCBB.
Yeah, so the way I'm reading it is that we give a preference to pupils and siblings.
So for what it's worth, my family actually utilized this system when I went to work for Milwaukee Public Schools. And so what I was told at the time was that the practice was that it's exactly what Kayla described. So as long as you were a resident, we were well established, your daughter was in 5th grade, and matriculated the whole way. Our son had just started K4. So both of them were guaranteed seats through 8th grade, but that it wasn't necessarily so it was the practice.
It was practice.
Yes. So there was no guarantee, but the practice up to this date had been.
Right.
And I think maybe that's what it is, because it says here, determines there's not otherwise space, you could give the seat. It has been the practice, and it is the
Okay.
practice that I have continued to follow, because
Okay.
that was the impression, the time that I have been here. That's always what I would tell a family. Currently, when families call me, I tell them that, our language is up in the air. We can do a tuition waiver, if they're here at the end of September. But I cannot guarantee whether or not there's going to be seats, because I don't know how the language of the policy may change. The district is looking at all of our policies right
So
now.
when we started looking at our policy resource guide and pulling all the open enrollment, right away we saw that one of the choices was preference or guarantee. And so we were like, we have to have this conversation to determine what we're.
what's the recommendation for that?
Well, it's up to the board what they want to decide. Like
We
I
just
said,
wanted to give some background, so when we work on the policy, you kind of.
Oh, yeah,
okay.
the other
I
thing is of the 37 students, 10 of those 37 are special ed. So that's a full teacher.
So I guess the things I would wanna understand, because what the underlying message I hear is that there are financial implications, potentially negative to our district with a guarantee policy.
And
That's-
staffing.
Correct me if I'm not,
Yeah.
if I stand that wrong.
It's
but I-
staffing issues.
Okay, it's staffing issues.
Mhm.
So I guess I would say when we consider this policy again, that background information would be important, like to understand the financial impact and also the impact on equity. So like I'm thinking if there's a proposal, it's like, here's our summary on, you know, the equity lens or not, like how does this fall in there, and also financial implications in order to understand how I'd wanna or not want to change
And
it.
I keep track, I've got our tuition waivers from 18, 19, 19, 20, all the
Okay.
way back to 18, 19.
Okay.
So you could see.
And then, you know, you can see the ones that we've accepted, and one of the things that I track on it is our special ed students too.
Okay.
So, and we've had families who've moved in, who've moved out. And last year we granted, more seats, but we had some families, sometimes the family will fill it out because they're not sure. I've got a family right now I reached out to today. Cause I call our family to our tuition waiver, cause I wanna make sure that they're aware, cause some of them did the paperwork last summer. And this doesn't happen until January or February. So they get an email, they get a mail, and they get a phone call saying, you know, here, this is how you do it, this is what you need to do. You are now responsible for transportation, although they were with the tuition waiver. And one family's like, well, I'm not sure, you know, dad got a new job, it's on the south side, we're kind of thinking about moving to the south side. So I said, well, to be safe, because if you don't do it, you're out. You know, do the paperwork. So, and now parents have until, according to the state paperwork, June 30th, I'm on vacation, July 5th, to accept the seats. And then I start working my way down the kindergarten thing.
Since this is just a discussion item for now, I would say why don't we go down the line and just ask any questions or request for additional information you want.
Just taking it in.
You're taking it, okay.
Just for clarification purposes, the district the student resides in pays an amount. If the student is identified with special education needs, is that amount different compared to a non-special education student?
Yeah, there is a difference. But it's the same net for. The other thing is that we also have your interest on the time, if you have special ed, it's in there.
And this is because it's on the
So-
first there, so somebody qualifies to.
Yes,
Or just, we'll pause for a second. Okay. No, it's okay.
There is, so if it.
Wait, can she
yeah,
finish
yeah,
with
sorry.
cards and then you can go?
So the other thing I would just add is that, so for example, we have a student that's open enrollment and it's in their IEP for transportation. We do not provide transportation at open enrollment, but if it's in their IEP, then yes, we do. provide
Okay.
transportation.
And then do we get extra money from their district for that?
No, that's the additional cost that the district has on. And
I
then-
thought, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Karen, were you with that? Answer your question.
It did.
Okay, go
Thank
ahead,
you.
Ben.
Isn't there something where if someone has high needs, the other district, if it's open enrollment, so that they,
No, so you can only claim, it's called high cost needs.
yeah,
You can only do that if the resident students, if it's open enrollment, you cannot. So if we have somebody that it comes in and there's a lot of extra resources that the district has to put in, we can claim high costs, but it has to meet over 30%. So it is very rare that that happens. We may potentially have one district student that could, but you can only do that for. But other thing that's a possibility is something called transfer of service, which is something that,
yeah, that, okay.
yeah, that's the one that I'm looking into, but you have to pull in all of the pieces and talk about all the different costs, and then that's the one that you have to be in agreement with resident district.
Right. Okay, that's the one I remember, yeah, transfer service.
So what does that mean, transfer?
So transfer of services, it's when you can say, this is a student that came into our district that we were not anticipating the cost of their needs. And so this is above and beyond what we already had in our staffing or in our resources that we had to, and then we can potentially get a reimbursement cost for a percentage of that.
Is this like you have a kid who comes in and then they develop an IEP in our district? Is that typical?
There's a lot of like specific data that has to be met, but I think transfer service is something that's very underutilized with a lot of districts. Just because it is a lot of hoops to jump through, but you have the right criteria and you gather all of that, it's definitely worth it.
There are also caveats, correct me, about both the resident district and the receiving district, considering the costs and potentially negating the agreement.
The resident has to agree to the cost that you're claiming when above and beyond.
So we'll revisit when we get to the policy.
Yeah, as
bring
we-
some of that
yeah.
information.
Thank you. Thank you for all, that's a lot of
Thank you, Kayla.
information to
Oh,
digest.
I guess I do have a question. Are you gonna come with a recommendation or are we just gonna develop it?
For policy?
Yeah.
We'll come through.
Okay.
Excellent.
If you live, if there's questions you think of later, I'm here next week, but then I'm on vacation, but just reach out, just email me.
Okay.
I'll answer the best that I can.
It is super complex, and I think my only comment about it is at one point, districts were getting fully reimbursed for services when a student enrolled was receiving services, and that's no longer the case. So sometimes it feels like a gamble, you know what I mean, in terms of making those decisions, and we're guaranteeing a spot, and there's services that we could potentially be struggling to provide a student.
The only thing, so I benefited from open enrollment, our kids benefited from open enrollment, and a lot of, I mean, you don't get open enrolled accidentally. Somebody has to go through a lot of hoops to get their child open enrolled. That being said, I think it's concerning when we have sufficient numbers of open enrollment to establish a full classroom in one grade level. I mean, I just think that that's something that we need to really be thinking about. I'm a fan, but, you know.
Well, and if you want, I can pull the numbers by grade as well. Yeah, I was gonna say, I think
I know I'm late, I'm sorry, but did you already talk, did someone already ask like how we compare to other districts, percentage wise?
That's a good question. That's another.
What's our percentage of open enroll students versus?
We get way, right, the higher level.
That would be nice to just sort of have a sense of where we fit.
I have a
Including-
spreadsheet that goes through all of the enrollment by grade level. So we'll do that there.
We should start a folder, like a,
Is it
with a
public?
policy around the open
Open
enrollment. so that
enrollment.
open data is-
Is that public? How are you gonna get that data?
I think it's public, you can do the number protected.
So it'd be interesting to me to see both the total open enrollment and the sped versus regular ed open enrollment.
One of the things with the partner districts is we look at also where the students that live in our district, where they open enrolling out to, and with the students that we're receiving, where are they coming from.
That's interesting.
Thank you.
It's gonna look like a conspiracy chart, like arrows. I'm really looking forward to that.
just to answer right now, of our 103, 16 are sped. And that was for this year. And I won't know the numbers until, and it's an easy pull of it until Opal rolls everything over, and that's not until.
But basically what that tells me is the open enroll sped percentage is the same as our entire school sped percentage, about 15%, right? Does that sound?
We're sitting at, we might be a little higher than
Oh, okay.
15% now. We're about.
Thank you. Thanks, you. We will be moving on to item 3A. We have a proposal. Do you want to come out? Meet your back, please come up. Do you want to introduce? Do you want to introduce the topic or?
Yeah, so, you know, this has been the last year or so a process of figuring out what our priorities are, figuring out our big rocks, going through our sale work. Obviously, equity is a priority in this district. There's been training in the past. We have lots of new staff. There's been lots of turnover, teachers and administrators. We've got the ad hoc equity committee that's created some documents for us, and now we're talking about professional development moving into next year. So we've got our strategic planning work that's going to happen, and our big pieces of PD around RTI, PLC work, And as we know, all of that work has a foundation in equity. So I have a personal history with Mr. Beekman. We were both principals at the same school in Racine, not at the same time. But it was a school that very much needed equity work. It was about 50% Hispanic, 50% African American neighborhood school, almost 100% free and reduced lunch, and not great scores in literacy and math. And we needed to do something different with our staff in that building in order to meet the needs of our kids, because as we know, in many instances, the staff don't always mirror the student population. So we have to work with that to get people to a space that they're doing what they need to do for kids. So we reconnected. You guys were actually there at the conference this year. He's moved on to a new position at DPI around equity and inclusion, and then also does some work. I had gone to a CISA workshop that talked about the survey that he's going to talk about. And then I connected with him and he brought up the survey. And so there was a connection there because it was something we were thinking about. Came out with the leadership team, which was really excited about doing this work, because the first step would be the board, the leadership team, taking this survey and doing some professional development, figuring out where we are. So I said way more than I need to say. So I will turn it over to Dimitri, so because I've shared the proposal with you guys a couple of times in updates.
Yeah.
And he offered to come in person, which is great, and just talk more about it and answer questions. That's awesome. So thanks for coming.
Thank you for the invitation. It's important for me to come in person and to really explain who I am, what we do. It's my wife, my partner with All Drive. So we're two educational consultants, really focusing on and passionate about educational equity and creating the most safe and welcoming learning and working environments. A little bit about myself.
Come sit here with us.
She said no.
Come on.
I asked her, she said no.
I think that's our partners. Would you be doing this work with him?
Yes.
Well, I would like to invite you to come
Come
on
on.
here.
Uh,
Be in the back. We're nice. We're nice.
We're talking about equity.
All right, thank you.
So
Sorry.
About me, I've been in education coming on 30 years. Started off as a gym teacher, classroom teacher, assistant principal at the elementary, middle school level, director principal at the elementary, middle school level, principal at a charter school, director of equity and seventh largest school district in Wisconsin. Who's getting a lot of media attention right now.
Arrowhead.
So for a while, so they're moved on to CISA 6 as a consultant, and now in my part time, I like the work that I do with DPI as the executive director for equity and inclusion, but I'm really passionate about the work that my wife and I do. Is really to create and connect and build relationships. Educators, families, and students. We feel that school should be a place where students can live and hope and dream, and where the educators bring out that hope and really be able to connect with them. So, been focusing on equity for the past 15 years. My wife and I are certified with the IDI, the Intercultural Development Inventory tool that many of you will experience in September. November and February for the entire staff. It is an assessment. Takes 20 to 30 minutes depending on how analytical or critical you are. It just asks you questions about how you feel about certain things. There is a one-on-one debrief following that. So every individual will have a one-on-one debrief after that with myself or Maria. Information is 100% confidential. No one will have access to the results because we feel that people's lived experiences are different, and we do not want to shame the results. With that, before we even get into that, there is an IDI launch that my wife and I will do, and that can be done virtually or in person, to explain what the process will look like, the steps afterwards, and then administer the assessment. We have one-on-one debriefs with everyone. We have resources for everyone because we create the plan together. We aren't like the Harvard implicit bias assessment where you get the assessment, you get your results, but now what? Now what do you do? So we have a strategic plan that we sit down with everyone individually to come up with that plan. Following that, there's a 3-hour group debrief that we will conduct, and it really aligns with the educational equity should be embedded in every part of education. It should be siloed. It should be in the curriculum. It should be in the resources, the teachers, and the retention of teachers. So all those things go hand in hand. What we found to be successful with this, being able to start a strategic plan or in the process of not going through this process, you're going to regurgitate and have the same mindset that you had before. But going through this will not expose that it reveal some of the stereotypes and biases that you may have that may prevent you from connecting with students, families, or colleagues, or making policies which are so vital to make sure that they're equitable for students, all families, and educators. So we do that. We found that it has brought teams together. There were a lot of misconceptions. We talked about microaggressions and subtle acts of exclusion. But we come at it as a place where we're here to help. It's not an I got you, but how can we learn and grow together? Because we haven't been exposed to a lot of these things, and our kids are coming in with so much, and if we aren't able to connect or ask those questions to be able to connect, we're kind of missing what we can do to push them to help them achieve at their highest levels. So that's what the IGI will do. We recommend assessing again within a year's time because the plan is going to take some work. It's not going to be okay. This is a one and done. Hopefully, the conversations will continue during the PLCs, during staff meetings. Information will be reported out during monthly board meetings on student achievement data, behavior data, attendance data. All those things will be incorporated, and we have plans for that on how it could be a part of your everyday conversation, not just okay, we had an equity training, now it's back to normal. But these are ongoing conversations. Continue to progress monitor the implementation and action steps that the board and the administrators will take. The psychologists, instructional coaches, and counselors, they'll have their own section, so we'll be able to have information from that to create their own action steps. And then also the rest of the staff, they won't have the one-on-one debriefs for the 125 other educators, but we will have that baseline data to show and compare where our leaders, where our educators, where are the board members, and how we can work together to create a strategic educational equity plan, a culturally responsive plan to connect with each other and our students and our families. So that is the IBI. It's a psychometric analysis. It's not an opinion survey. It assesses subjective culture, objective culture, which is the things that you can see, hear, feel, and taste. It's the what do I need to know about the values of another culture or another group. So we take a deep dive into that.
Go down and questions or comments.
Oh yeah, the only question I jotted as you were talking, I mean, this sounds fascinating. I love the idea of being evaluated. No, and I'm serious, I know that came out very funny. But we should always be testing ourselves and looking in the mirror and rethinking and considering where our gaps or blind spots or implicit biases are. So I love this idea. The only thing I was thinking about as you were talking was, does this ever work with students? Is this something you would ever do with a student body to do any sort of deep dive like this?
I think at the high school level, definitely just because of the age appropriateness, but it's something that we can discuss and look into. I think they are trying to develop a student assessment because those conversations are starting in elementary school.
Yeah, but I love the idea of focusing on leadership top down. I mean, we've talked about this before. You can bring in groups like No Place for Hate, or what is it, the Anti-Defamation League? Is that No Place for Hate? All that kind of stuff. And you can work with students on changing their mindsets, but they're gonna up and leave. And then we still have the same staff and leadership, us, potentially generating, those baseline problems that lead students to have conflict. So to me, it's really exciting to imagine doing that top-down work with people who stay, right? So that's all I'm thinking about.
I love the idea that it's supported, right? That you do the analysis and then you find out what's going on that you didn't realize, and then there's a conversation to be had, because have done some of those Harvard tests and you're like, oh, what do I do about it, right?
Dang.
Right. And I was like, oh, okay, that's good information. But then, you know, how, is it a coaching cycle or after those one-on-ones, then what is the structure of the support for the staff?
Yeah, so we are on call for your needs and check-in. So we'll check in periodically with everyone that we have one debrief with and just follow up with how things are going, check on the progress monitoring tools and the action steps that the group has created to make sure that those things are going well. Able to, when we get invited to come back and have some further discussions in the different schools and the different departments, that's what we're looking for. So we are able to adjust it to the way that you need it.
What we talked about too is the way that Jenica and Kelly has built the professional development, there's always like a differentiated time for every other month so that there are sessions that staff could sign up for. So if there are like articles or videos or reading that might be part of that person's plan, they will have time to do some of that self-work during those days built in. So we talked about weaving that together too.
And like I said, we have all the resources, so we don't want to just come up with a plan and say, okay, now you go ahead and find the books, the podcasts, the articles. No, we have everything, and those that we don't have, we'll research and find out.
And do you help the staff identify how to prioritize what resources to explore?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. On the coaching front, that's an interesting question because then would there be any observational element to it? Would you be coming into classrooms or to board meetings, observing, reflecting on that with us based on our results in our surveys? How do you envision that coaching happening?
Yeah, I think that's something that Alex and I will have to follow up on. And because we love to be hands-on because there are certain things that may be happening that are being overlooked, and from an outsider perspective, we know exactly what we're looking for to improve, continuous improvement, and to correct some of the things that may need to be adjusted in the classroom or cafeteria.
And one of the reasons we wanted to do the one-on-one coaching with us and support staff is because then as they're having PLC meetings and RTI meetings, like the coaches and psychs will have that deeper dive with them to be able to support teachers.
And we really wanted to start with it. It's amazing because not every board is on board with going through this process because of fear of what they don't know. And to show that, hey, maybe I need to work in some of these areas, but I don't want to because I'm close to retirement, or the kids need to adjust, or the families need to adjust to the way that I'm doing business. That's not true educational leadership or education. So we have to be flexible and adjust with our time.
Yeah, I'm just curious, what's the intended outcome from this consulting? And, you know, when you did this in Racine, what were the results?
Oh, we worked in Racine, we didn't do this in Racine.
Oh,
Yeah.
So, or what are some results from other districts?
So we did this. I did this work in Platteville, Caparna, Waupun, and the goals that are set are going to be based on the strategic plan. But what we noticed from student engagement surveys, parent engagement surveys, that their relationships with their teachers have been better. If students don't feel safe, they don't feel welcome or heard, they're not going to perform at their highest. And many of the schools that we're working in, those data points have improved. Those students, not only with the quantitative data, the academic achievement has improved, attendance has improved. We're really closing that gap, especially with our students with disabilities or those students that are identifying as LGBTQ, which are the most challenging group of students right now in our state, with 60% of them feeling like they don't belong in their school. So we're really trying to create that inclusive community and to really improve achievement and quantitative feedback from students and families and colleagues as well.
Yeah, no, I'm just asking because, I mean, we've had consultants coming before. We had someone, I mean, we've had them coming before and test scores dropped.
Consultants for what?
Equity, yeah.
In this district?
Yeah.
When and,
Uh,
do you know?
Well, I don't,
Was
it
it
was-
how
it
long
was-
ago?
Yeah.
Oh, you mean
yeah,
Oh,
ICS?
years ago now.
And that was in
Oh.
2017, starting in 2017.
Yeah.
And like, again, like with education, it's really difficult to isolate variables. And, you know, so, and that's one of the issues with educational research is that it's just really hard to eliminate everything, right?
Yeah.
Focus on it. You know, we're doing this thing, does it actually work? And, you know, there's all sorts of biases. Like, I mean, there's a bias of something new, like literally doing something new will improve student outcomes, but eventually it flatlines and maybe even goes back down. So, so when I say this in 2017, that also applies, right? Where, you know, test scores went down. Well, was that the consulting or was that something else?
Right.
I don't know. So really we're kind of going off the feels right now. And so it's just, and you know, you can collect data on, you know, what you were saying is right, you know, like students feel more included and things like that. But my main concern, and I talk about this every time for the last few consultants, is we're spending a lot of money on consultants. We know something like tutoring would have a direct impact on student outcomes. You know, so I mean, what you're doing is important, you know, but my concern is with our budget, you know, we have to spend it on things that we know are highly effective for student outcomes, right? And that's what John Hattie says, you know, when you look at effect sizes, you know, anything above 0.4, yeah, you can invest in it, that's great, you know. Anything lower, you can still do if it's, you know, within reasonable expense, right? So
Does he
anyway.
have research on equity consulting?
I don't think, I mean,
Because I mean, that number means nothing unless he has the data to
yeah.
put this into that context. Right?
I don't think he specifically does it on that, no. So that's what I'm saying, where it's hard to, we're kind of doing it on fields right now versus hard data, but that's hard to come across in education, and I understand that. So, but my only point is, you know, if we have funds for that, shouldn't we also have funds for after-school tutoring? Or shouldn't we also, you know, and so maybe we do both, you know, if we have enough funds. But I just have a concern when we're on a tight budget, where are we putting those funds and are we doing on that highly effective area? Because the school's goal is to have high student outcomes. So again, that's my only concern. You know, what you're doing is important, but it's just, you know, where are we allocating the funds? And I've said this about other consultants too.
Yeah, don't take it
It's not
personally.
Yeah, please don't take it personally, sorry. I just, yeah, it's just,
No, that's right.
it's nothing personal. I know all of it, so.
And the work that we did in surgery, as Allison mentioned, there were students that weren't proficient at all within 3 years' time. Doing some of the work that I'm going to be sharing with all of you, we almost exceeded expectation on our report card. So if it's important to the leadership and everyone within the district to talk that same language, the DNA is going to trickle down to the educators and they're going to see the results in the classroom. And if you want to look at the subgroup data, how are our Black and brown students compared to everyone else in the district? With the students with disabilities, how are they performing? And use this baseline data this year and you're going to see that there's a change. So
I will say that back in 2017, I did some of that. Well, I don't know if they ended up using it or if they redid it, but they had me fill out some of those reports for the aggregate data.
I mean, efficacy depends on application
Commitment.
and implementation, right? You
Implementation,
can go
which-
through self-evaluation, but unless there's top-down leadership that pushes that change
Right.
through, it's,
And-
you know, you can't even determine if the training is effective or not because it hasn't been implemented effectively back into the schools, right?
Yeah.
That's my concern when we hire consultants. When we stop hiring the consultant, can we continue to work, right? 5, 6 years, 10 years, 20 years? Do we keep it going?
Okay, I have a few comments or questions. I like going with the feels in my gut is, and right now, so that's not necessarily a problem for me because I think my gut says when you have students that feel welcome and included, you have students that do better, whether that's anecdotally or data. it doesn't matter to me. I want our students to feel welcome and included. And I like this idea of top-down learning and modeling doing that work. So I do like that. The one thing that I'm missing is that I'm like, oh, the staff, if staff had the one-on-one debriefer support, I understand that's probably sort of not able to be done with time and people, but so thinking about just that piece as we go forward, like I feel like they are the most they are the forward facing, part of our district to the students. And so to me, it seems like they would utilize or benefit from that support even more than leadership. So that's just one piece where I'm like, would love to think about how could we fill in that gap, even if it's not one-on-one debrief. So these resources, but just check-ins, or I don't know how that works. So the other thing I wanted to ask about, okay, so you mentioned strategic planning, and in your proposal, the August conversation you would have is mention strategic planning. We will not have a strategic plan at that time. I will be beginning that work in around that time.
So here's what's really interesting, that he's worked a lot with Schrader.
Yes, so this
this
is, so I
work
would,
out, we would be connecting
so
them.
that is so as that's happening concurrently, I would want to understand sort of how are these pieces gonna work or fit together. And then in terms of like action plans and steps beyond this work, I'd love to incorporate, should the board, this work to go forward, thinking about utilizing our equity committee, thinking about how do we engage the community, like on maybe some of this, or like what it like, just, kind of thinking about, I don't know. So that's just, those are the things like floating around my, they're not full concepts. That's just, it's
Are
exciting.
you thinking of like parent and caregiver participation in the survey, that kind of thing? Like,
Or it's like, so if we're doing all this work and we've got these action plans, thinking about communicating out that work, like our process, or thinking about communications around this, thinking about how the equity committee might take this and move into the community conversation space, like just connecting the work being done here and bringing it to the community. Not necessarily them going through it, but with some piece like that.
That connects to something that Dimitri and I talked about around, so if we were to all do this work as a board and leadership team, how we then communicate out to the staff to say, here's the work we're doing, and like making sure that we're really transparent about the process.
And modeling growth. Here's what I am
modeling
working
being
on.
uncomfortable.
Here's what's uncomfortable and risky for me, and what I.
Here's where I messed up.
Yeah.
Sorry, I have one more thing, Ben, and then if you have more. And then, so you talked about this is cyclical, so it sounds like, it does need to be a continual process to monitor and see how we're doing. So, I'm sure you wouldn't know the exact cost of that, but is it similar? Like, cause you would do this whole process again, or does that next part, is that different? And
It would be different. It would be
Okay.
based on what you would need after a year's time.
Okay.
Gonna reassess and
Okay.
see how we did with the action steps and the goals that we're gonna set in our 3-hour for each.
Okay.
From there, then you'll be able to have sets of action steps for different groups. Each school could have their own specific goals as well. So that's gonna be
I lied, I do have one more question. There was a lot of talk with our equity committee and our leadership administration around an equity audit. I don't believe that is what, like, this is different than that. So could you, I'm not even entirely sure what an equity audit is, I'm going to be honest. And so I'm curious sort of how does this differ? Is that also something you do? And
No, we don't do equity audits.
Okay.
We could, but that would be more assistance from outside of the business
Okay.
to get to the we are working with Able Consulting, does equity audits, and really focus on what are some of the policies that are in place that may need to change. What are some of the things that are going on within the curriculum in the classroom that to create that change. Also, how to increase the enrollment of students with dual enrollment, how to post-secondary education, all those things. That's what.
that's more of the equity audit.
That's what actually.
Okay, that's helpful. Okay, Ben, you had a follow-up?
something like this, do we have other, have we asked other people?
I reached out to them through DPI,
Okay,
started the conversation, and then connected it to the strategic plan, all the work, so now I didn't do it that process.
yeah, typically don't we follow that process just to make sure that, you know,
I know
I
that
think
for
that's.
facilities, that's a policy that we have to do.
Anything over 5,000, but for
Um,
consultants.
Well,
Yeah,
this
for
is
consultants, it's
For facilities though.
over facilities.
Yeah, for consultants, there's no.
Well, I guess, I mean, I would like other proposals. But, I mean, I guess that's up to you. Because I feel like that's a standard practice.
That's good feedback.
Mhm.
To consider. Does anybody else have any questions or comments for?
I'm thankful that you can, it's nice to meet you in person.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's exciting
for
to dream
sharing
about
too.
doing this work. Yeah.
All right, great. So that was just a
Yep.
discussion
Yep.
item. So
Yep.
are you bringing that to the June
Yes.
board meeting?
For a vote.
Okay, great, awesome. Thank
So
you
we
so
have
much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. We are moving on. We are behind
Yeah,
schedule.
are we?
I'm a
No,
little
it was
bit.
good conversation.
It was great. Thank you. No, I thought you might have been a little ambitious. with
I
yours.
was ambitious with my time.
My wife-
Sorry, guys, I was ambitious with my time.
Don't worry.
All right, so, but we are moving on to the Glen Hills Facilities Report and Building Tour.
Ah.
I thought you were gonna introduce yourself. So you, first I wanted to just backtrack a little bit and welcome Karen.
Oh, that's not on the agenda.
So I
Where's
was
your
trying
husband?
to
Is he
weave,
gonna-
I can weave it in, I can weave it in because then they will all introduce
Oh,
themselves
there
to
you
you.
go.
Because they've presented before, this is our wonderful futures facilities planning team. So I asked Mike to include some introductions because you haven't, I don't know, you were here. Were you
I was in the
at-
audience.
Okay, so you did kind of meet them, but just officially. So what we're doing is we're stretching it out a little bit because they've done a lot of really good work and collected a lot of data. So what we've done is tonight will be Glen Hills and then we'll do each school, each building separately. So they're here tonight to share some information about Glen Hills and then take us on a tour. So I'm just gonna hand it over to
Sounds great.
Carl.
Yeah, sounds great. So when we were here a few weeks ago, we looked at kind of a timeline of where we're heading in this process. And the whole goal is really, with the future facility focus, really create a long-range master plan for the district, right? So step one in that is really understanding our current state, like what is the state of the facilities, under the pretext that really, a problem well put is half solved, right? That mindset that before we can jump to talk solutions, we really have to wrap our arms completely around what are all the needs. And as you might imagine, some of those are big picture things, big puzzle pieces. A lot of them are very, very granular in nature, right? And in this process, as we think about facilities, we kind of bucket them into two pieces, which the group is going to walk through. One is going to be our raw infrastructure of the building, roofs and windows and doors and carpet and lighting, HVAC systems. That's a lot of the granular stuff. But some of the big puzzle pieces, things are going to be focused on academics, right? Where the district's going educationally.
Sorry.
It's okay, no, it's okay. Yeah. So with that said, what we thought we would do, as you might imagine, for 3 buildings, this much square footage, the age of these buildings, there's a lot of stuff to talk about, right? There's a lot of things that have been found. The intent was to break those into 3 different sessions and actually try to go to each of those buildings so that the school board has an opportunity to, amidst all the other great stuff you're talking about, pause for a moment, do a deep dive in just one building at a time. And really by the end of the summer, we feel confident that we have our arms around the needs district-wide. And with that, we can start to transition to start to talk about potential solutions. Does that kind of make sense to the group at kind of a high level? And so what we thought we would do today is a quick intro of the team. The PRA and Infindorf teams are going to present on needs here at this building. And then we thought we would take a few minutes and actually go tour the building so you can see firsthand some of the key takeaways that the group gathered from. So I think with that said, what we'll do is maybe a quick round of intros and allow everybody just to quickly reintroduce.
think we're waiting to get it.
Slide
I think we're waiting to get it.
I'm working on it.
Like intro only. Yes.
We also each have the slideshow.
Oh, you do? Okay, great. We were just gonna come up, because it feels weird to sit way back here.
Right.
and then-
Yeah, come on up.
We'll
Come
sit
on.
right behind. I'll take it off the back.
Somebody stand in front of Mike.
We won't fight you.
That's the shortest stick,
Oh, I doubt you're the shortest.
I can slide
Oh,
those over.
Here, yeah. I was gonna say, I'm deciding.
I'm trying to go.
Ooh, 5'0".
You know,
I'm
another.
5'5".
I'm 5. I used to be 5'1". But
I
I'm
used to be
56.
5.5 feet, and that's half of an inch.
Yes.
Pre-pregnancy.
But
Do
the
Pilates.
the DMV doesn't want that.
Stretch the core.
Conversion table.
Another part of going to each of the school buildings is also, right, we're welcoming community here too. And we do have community members here. Maybe at the next couple, we'll have a few more. But to have the opportunity to bring the community into the school buildings, because generally unless there's an event, if they have a child, they might be there. Otherwise, they may have never, or it's been 20 years or 10, 15 years that they've been in a school building. So it's important to welcome the community in. We're given a pretty tight timeline. So our tour, we are going to be walking the whole time. So I haven't started the stopwatch yet because the presentation started.
Oh, we've come. So anyway, there's a title slide. We can skip that once it gets up there.
Right, yeah, we got that. So very excited to have the Findorf and PRA team.
Nicole Whitman, I'm with Findorf, I'm a senior project manager there. We are overseeing the cost control associated with the scopes and stuff that PRA is identifying, as well as doing some assessments of the mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems in the buildings.
Excellent.
Perfect. The other Nicole, so I'm Nicole Dryden with PRA, so the architecture side, senior associate architect at PRA, do a lot of the facility study work, and
I'm Devin, architect, district president, partner. This is another partner.
Thanks. I'm Nick Katz, along with these two professionals. I lead our educational space planning side of things. So what they did, how the buildings work. That's where a lot of my effort is. Mike first.
Yeah, Mike Hacker with kids.
I don't believe
Man of the hour.
I am Mike Carlson. I am the head custodian here at the middle school. I keep the district running very smoothly behind us.
Agreed. Yep. Agreed.
Very grateful.
Agreed.
To add a different card, just in case, I didn't know if you knew. So Mike as an owner's rep, he just kind of acts the liaison for us, like the architect, construction firm, and it actually has the district wealth of knowledge in this industry. And so that, but these types of roles have been overstructured for.
You're our advocate.
Yeah. Want to go to the next one? We are super excited to be here tonight, but we're also excited to welcome two more events. As Mike mentioned, we're going to be at Parkway in July. We're going to be at Good Hope in August. And we also made the newsletter that save the date right here. So thank you very much for that. It's exciting.
All right, real quick, Mike kind of hit on this earlier, did an excellent job teaming me up. So this is our, you've seen this slide already before, so just to ground us in where we are in our process, we really have kind of two big phases to this effort. The first is, as Mike kind of alluded to earlier, is really identifying what our questions are before we really start to set out answering questions. We need to know what is it that we're questioning, and that's what we're going to cover here tonight for Glen Hills. That's the existing conditions assessment, the nuts and bolts, and we're also going to look at the functional capacities and how this building is working as an educational tool, which is the reason the building exists in the first place. In future sessions, we'll get into looking at what we might do about some of the questions that we identify in this early round.
And tonight we're going to look at highlights or like big picture things. We're not going to go through the granularity of all of it. That's within the facility condition assessment as well as educational space adequacy. I hit on a few of those, but then the tour is going to hit some more.
Right. So this next slide, this is a bit of text from the actual report. I just really wanted it as a picture of Devin poking at stuff. So that he did actually get into the nooks and crannies. But really the
there's any holes in the brick.
Yeah, but this does kind of speak to the level of granularity that we do get into, right? So if nothing else changes in the district, there are still things that have to be forecasted and planned ahead for proactively, because buildings do have costs, and we do need to make sure we're investing in these facilities to make sure that they remain good, solid, warm, safe, dry learning environments. And that's really what this first step is about. And then just some quick stats on this building in case you guys didn't know. Just under 20 acres of land on this site, 71,000 square feet of space here in the building, originally built back in 1969. So it's starting to add a few years to its belt.
It's the younger building in the district.
It is, but it's, still 69, it's all good. Currently housing about 492 kids here in that 71,000 square feet. And then kind of unique to this building, of course, is it's got a couple of other things going on within its walls, including the district office and maybe more unique, the Senior Citizen Center. We'll talk a little bit about what that means. It's wonderful, we have community in the building, but it does present some challenges to the operation of the facility.
This is a little bit of a preface of kind of the summary that we're going to talk about tonight on our facilities condition assessment. So as we've kind of alluded to a little bit, this whole process culminates in a pretty thick PDF report that we'll have all together at the end of the summer. So this is really kind of taking those high level steps, going through the process together. And this is part of it. So in the report, we have these full matrices that go into these categories that you're seeing on the right. So big picture, site, exterior, interior systems. And then we also make recommendations based on standards. So for example, you would be grandfathered in for anything accessibility related. As a building, you would be grandfathered in for anything that's code related, as long as it was code compliant at the time of construction. And you would be, kind of grandfathered in for anything that's safety and security related, as long as it was compliant at the time of construction.
So we need to meet 1969 standards.
You have to. So we are making,
until it changes.
So we are making recommendations based off of 2023 standards. That's why you'll see this kind of divided out into a maintenance piece that is really like roofs, windows, flooring, like what is the service life on flooring and when does it need to be planned for replacement, versus these recommendation pieces of, this is the best practice for 2023. That doesn't mean that you are required to do it. Although if you do get into renovations, that does come up where, the second you start touching it, you now own it. You're liable for it. So this is kind of really big picture, how we rank buildings to have these kind of summary reports. So you'll see, the good old stoplight, green is good, red is bad, and that kind of correlates to how soon we see those items being needed. So in the report, you'll see there's hundreds and hundreds of items, not because Mike is doing a bad job, because he's doing a phenomenal job. This building, is hanging on and doing great. But because everything is really broken out, we don't want to be generic. We want to be really specific about everything that's going in and give that to Nicole's team to be able to very specifically price the best of our ability. So that's why we've got, a number of line items that you would see. So this is kind of where it comes together. And then the good would be no major needs anticipated in 15 years. And you'll see it kind of drops off 5 years for each level, with poor being kind of, we need to address this now. So this is kind of the report card. Again, there's a whole bunch of detail that goes into this, but this is kind of the, the 100-foot view. So site at this building, ranking that as fair, and we'll get into some of the highlights there that go into that ranking. Exterior as fair to poor, interior as fair, systems as fair, accessibility, so on the recommendation sides, accessibility is fair, safety and security is fair. We'll get into some reasons for that in a second here. This is just really quick snapshot of the site usage. We'll see a little bit as we walk around. I know you're probably all very familiar with parking and getting to the entry, but just looking at, we like to really make sure before we get into the site pieces that we're understanding all of the things that are happening on the site separation, and then obviously pick up and drop off and bus traffic with every school is a big pain point, and a really important item. So this is looking at front lot with staff and visitor parking. We have the special education buses coming up to the front secure entry sequence, and then our lower entry, which has the shared parent pickup and drop off, as well as our buses going all the way around to the back, and some play and athletic spaces that they are sharing with there, which does kind of come into our safety and security recommendations.
Questions? So when does that standard end of, if was okay in 1969, it's okay now? Because I do know that, you know, in the early 2000s here, they had to take out asbestos, right? I mean, you have to take that out, especially if it's in the ceiling, not necessarily in the tiles, right? So when you say that it can't, 1969 standards can't apply, that obviously ends somewhere. So like where does that go?
So you are allowed to maintain facilities essentially in perpetuity under the code that was in effect at the time that they were built. Now, you can't come back and put new asbestos into your building, primarily because you can't buy it anymore. But so say in this room, if we replace the carpet, if we replace the ceiling tiles, if we painted the walls are not brick, you would not have to address any code issues within this building. If we started to move this wall, now we do. So now you can say this room now has to be brought up to today's standard. So it's when you physically start to change the configuration of a space, that's when you have to go up to code.
So if somebody sues you over.
Yeah,
like a
so
lack of
That would be the other caveat, especially for accessibility, is that it is
So it's a
national.
liability, even if it's not required.
Exactly.
And we still scored fair.
We'll talk about some things there.
Sorry,
That's
that's
more,
really, I'm
that's
just
more
like
of a
trying
reflection
to,
of
that was a
how
hard one
poor
for me.
Wisconsin in general with the age of the schools is. So.
And having accommodations is different. Let's just be clear. You could have a stair that does not meet code, but if you provided accommodations for that student.
Like an
some other
alternate
way,
entrance or
then-
something, but you
then-
could still be. Or.
Danielle, exactly, because what we're talking about is the code implications, so what
Yeah.
allows us to maintain our license, but
Right, I
yes,
understand.
legal, legally.
Just a bigger concept
Absolutely.
for us to consider.
Yeah.
Correct.
Right, 1990 was quite a while ago.
So when we renovated to put drywall in here, then we. No,
So the
okay.
gray area?
Well, I don't know when did you do that?
Oh, that was probably 2012, 2013.
Put this wall in?
Yeah, that wall, the internal walls, because it used to be removable walls,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
The temporary walls.
Yeah.
So
Is
then
that
they.
a renovation?
That is definitely it.
Oh, so we
Yes.
have to be in compliance.
And when we put in the, all the changes with Genius Lab,
Well, and we, you know, the
So
carpets.
it's limited to the area that you're affecting.
Maybe we should
So, if you're,
Yeah.
if you're building out the Genius Lab and all the spaces it's egressing into would need to be compliant. It's not saying, you know, you need to go down to the pool and make that compliant because you built the Genius Lab.
Okay.
There are requirements for once you start doing a renovation, a certain percentage of your budget is required to go to accessibility accommodations to. So that eventually the idea is as you do projects, they're requiring to use a small percentage of your budget to work on accessibility. So eventually, hopefully your entire building would be up to current accessibility standards.
Yeah, because I mean, they renovated this library too, so. Okay.
It depends on the type of renovation that you're doing. There's 3 different levels.
Okay.
If you end up getting to that 3rd level, then you do have to bring the entire building up. And even in the level 2, which Nick and Nicole were addressing, where a certain percentage of your budget, it has to be set aside until all of the concerns in the building are gone. So if I'm touching something, you know, let's say I'm doing the Genius Lab again, and the only thing that's not accessible in the building is in the lower level, then I'm spending 20% of your budget. It has to be spent to fixing any ADA thing wherever it is in the building until they're all gone.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, I was about to say, I think maybe the only place that wasn't touched was the small gym, but actually that was because we put, well, anyway, so yeah.
Yeah, so finished change outs, kind of 1-for-1 swaps would not require that upgrade. It's when you start moving doors, moving walls, changing systems, like how they actually work, creating new spaces that you would then need to bring up to current code accessibility standards.
So I guess I would just say on a high level, for me, what would be important as a school board member, community member, parent, et cetera, is just this, like, it's, I think the next steps around, like, when we're thinking about future usage, like, I don't care if it's about code. I think that accessibility is part of that future educational model regardless, so that just needs to be wrapped into everything. Right, so.
An accessibility need can hit any of us walking out of this room.
Yeah.
And it's not just being in a wheelchair, right? It's
No,
breaking
it's all
arms,
kinds
breaking
of-
a leg, it's visibility.
Well, sensory, I mean, it's all kinds of considerations, but I'm just like, the code is.
I'm right there with you. That's exactly, I was just sitting here writing down, there's code, there's equity issues, there's learning environments.
Yeah.
So I know we're just at the beginning.
Yeah, so.
But for me, it's all wrapped up in one rule, right?
Yeah.
As I think about what do spaces look like, you can talk about door access, but then there are sensory needs, there are ways different bodies work.
Absolutely.
Ways
Yeah.
children see, their learning environments, how sound travels.
Yeah.
There's just a lot.
Yeah.
Right, that all needs to be part of.
Thanks for traveling down that path with us.
Sorry.
No, that's a path
Those were things I'd written when I looked at your presentation. I was like,
And that's a path that, especially when we get past these first two steps, that's a path, that's
right.
a pretty big path that we have to really explore, right? Getting back to what is the purpose of these buildings and how do they meet the needs of all of the students and the community members? And it's different, right? Than what they were trying to do likely when these buildings were built originally. So we have to explore that, define that, and that's part of this exploration. It's much bigger than code, but we have to start with the fundamental building blocks, work our way up. So more to come.
We'll get to the feels.
Yeah.
So really quick, our site highlights. So what's going into that fair? So we talked about the size. That's one of the things we look at. So room to expand, room on the site. So we're just slightly below what we would recommend for new middle schools. That would usually be about 24, 25 acres, and we're at 19.6. So not crazy out of range there. Big thing at this school, we have pavement replacement, kind of not super urgent, but definitely on the docket. We need to be looking forward for that so that we're not, in a position of having anything that's failing. Athletic and site amenities a lot of them are worn, so we'll take a quick peek at some of the amenities out there and the athletic spaces. Drainage issues at several areas around the site, that's definitely something we like to take care of as soon as possible, because as we all know, water can cause damage if left alone. And then additional signage to clarify circulation on site.
You mean of cars?
Of cars, of buses, of
All the
people, yes. Exterior highlights. The number one big issue here is we have original wood windows that we will go and poke, and they are a little squishy. Material damage from weather, wear, and water. So especially the brick, which we'll look at that. So that's kind of, where we're talking, it's intertwined with the site where we're talking about having water issues. It wears away at the mortar, it wears away at the integrity of the brick. And then many doors that are damaged and or in poor condition around the exterior, and then soffit damage. So there's a little bit of material damage, a lot of it's cosmetic though. So that's a unique construction here with the soffit that poses some unique challenges. And then on the interior, so we have a lot of doors that are original to our install and that are wood framed. So definitely not something we would recommend in a school setting, is to have wood framed doors. They start to show wear, they really just don't hold up. Lockers, we're having some damage there. We're not able to find replacement parts. Some of them are having issues becoming attached from the walls. Bathroom finish damage and wear, so we'll go see those. Ceilings, again, I'm guessing they're probably original or older. Some damage and age there. And then casework, and then the locker rooms, the athletic locker room benches in poor condition. And then
getting into the systems, we walked through with Mike. Big thing was lighting. It's getting aged and inefficient. Some suggestions for LED. Commenting on the stuff that Nicole had seen with the bathroom fixtures. There were some more those fixtures that are getting there. And then the air handling units throughout the building are in a process of segmented stages of needing replacing, as well as some of the pneumatics and booster coils with the HVAC systems.
And again, major kudos to Mike, because I know Laura from Vendor's team who walked with all the MVP was pulling kind of the expected service life of all this equipment and was like, no, it actually looks in pretty good.
Yeah, I was gonna say level 1 was very low. It was all the more aged stuff. Correct. Thank you.
So then moving to that recommendation side, accessibility. So we're measuring against ADA, we're measuring against ANSI. So that's what's tied into the IBC building code if you want to get into more details. So big thing here is that most of our door hardware is non-compliant throughout the building. So knob type is not compliant. You would use the typical lever that you would see in most modern buildings. Door configurations are missing pull clearances, or they're kind of in sequence wrong. So if you think about someone trying to navigate and any kind of mobility impairment, kind of difficult not having that space next to a door to be able to pull it open, or to get through doors in a sequence that are opening into each other. So we have that at multiple locations around the building. And then all bathrooms except for our main floor group bathroom, which we'll go into, are not compliant for ADA. So a couple things happening there. The fixtures are the wrong dimensions or the wrong height. None of the other bathrooms besides the main floor have ADA stalls, so that's kind of always a big one that we'll see. More detail-oriented things like grab bars, and then door clearances and entrances there as well. And then we do have some access issues around the site, which we will see on our tour. And then safety and security. So again, we talked about site safety, so traffic patterns crossing, site safety, separation of play and traffic, classroom configurations. So I know, we talk about these, but they are technically also a code issue. You can't egress through another space to get out to your path of egress. So that is why it is specifically flagged as a code issue and recommendation. And then compartmentalization and access into secure parts of the building is a concern, which we'll look at. And then door hardware, so making sure that we have that ability to lock as a student from the inside of a classroom. And I'm gonna let Nicole take this, but this is kind of her explanation of, at the end of our walkthroughs, we give them this crazy long Excel list, again, because we're trying to be as detailed and specific as possible. And our team does a wonderful job of making sense of it.
Yeah, so I have a couple people that help us out to go through the facilities condition assessments. We take all of this information, we prioritize it in these levels, the level 1, 1 to 2 years, the level 3, 3 to 5, or level 2, 3 to 5, level 3, 5 to 10, taking all this information and getting a budget together. Obviously, the elephant in the room is the volatile market right now, everything you have, material availabilities, costs, everything. We're also talking about doing stuff over the next 10 years. So we have to kind of look at some of the escalation and what we see as trends. Findorf does a bunch of stuff. We've been asked to speak at WASBO conferences to talk about how we react to this. So we're very aware of this and take it all into account. Not saying we have a crystal ball, but we do this regularly. So we have some idea of trends. The budgeting summary, this is based on conceptual scope. We talked about some of these ideas. Everything is very generic in the idea of the concept of this part needs to be addressed or not. It is consistent with scopes that we've seen in other schools that we do a bunch of projects on. It does include the inflation, knowing when we're going to be spending this money, whether it be in the next 2 years or 10 years out. So the stuff that has 10-year money, it has extra escalation on it. All of this stuff is assuming that it goes as a big project and requires all of the comprehensive total costs associated with it, the project management, the design aspect, any kind of contingencies, bond fee. If you were to take little parts and pieces and just do carpet by yourself, it would be less money, but we're putting it all out there with that. And it all is assuming that we would start bidding in like 2025 as far as a project. So that's what the budget does have in it. The budget is not final construction estimates. We don't have details, we don't have drawings, we don't have anything specific. It's not a defined scope. It is conceptual scopes. It is not a detailed estimate. We have a bunch of these buckets of stuff that we know is in there. It does not include hazardous material removal. That usually is done separately, and it is not inclusive of any operational costs. So taking all of this information and going back to the assessment that Nicole and PRA were talking about with the different levels, the 1 through 3, and then this overall recommendation for that accessibility best practice thing. So for Glen Hills, we have level 1 costs here showing at about 1.3 million. Level 2 for 3 to 5 years, 6.2 million. And level 3, 5 to 10 years is 2.5 million. And then adding that additional ADA recommendation stuff is another 12 million. And that's assuming that that would kind of tie into a large project happening more immediate. So that's where that is escalated to, is in that 1 to 2 year time frame. If that ends up getting pushed off, you would have different costs associated with that. Getting all of those different buckets of big scale. Now, how does this break out? Nicole has some nice pie charts.
Yeah, so just kind of looking at, we talked about the maintenance piece versus the recommendation pieces, so it's split down pretty 50-50 in terms of, bringing the building up to code best practices standards versus the maintenance pieces, with a lot of it really falling into that level 2 range, so projecting out about 3 to 5 years. There are a couple things that would be, recommended to do a little sooner, but it's really not the larger chunk. And then just looking a little bit at where those breakdowns are. So you'll see kind of the breakdown of everything over here, but I like these over here. So the breakdown of the maintenance, most of our cost is in the interior. So it's gonna be finishes a lot of the time. And then recommendations breakdown. So significant portion of that is going to be safety and security. So that's coming in as the larger dollar amount. A lot of the accessibility recommendations in here, I think, are obviously very important, but not as expensive items. And then that's also a little, it gets a little squishy, if you will, in between, because so like our connected classrooms are technically an accessibility issue as well, but they're in here as a code issue. So there is some crossover between the two items there.
Questions, I guess.
If I could just cue this up too, so as we talk about maintenance needs as a building, right, I think we're trying to do a couple things. One, get our arms around what are those needs so we know what we're solving for. If, as we go forward, there is no next step in this process, the whole goal of this exercise is to hand the district a crystal clear understanding of where are the things we need to start planning for and how soon should we start planning for them. What can the district afford to do out of operating budget and what just can't be, or the really big ticket things that might be looming out there. A lot of this is, when we talk levels, is really driven by timeline, right? Not necessarily by priority. We haven't prioritized these driven by other impacts other than how soon might they start to fall off and become potential costs. Does that make sense? Just as a framework for.
So I have like the, I'm not quite getting everything questions. So just bear with me, help me make sure I'm understanding this right. So I'm hearing 24.5 million roughly to maintain this existing space and come into compliance with ADA and other security and best practice needs. Correct. And just keep the building running.
Over the next 10 years.
Over the next 10 years, 24 million total expenditures, give or take, to keep this building alive.
Correct.
In good
for
shape
10 years.
as a building,
Right.
not necessarily as best practices for a educational tool, but yes,
Right, but
in
just
good shape as a building.
Existing.
And what
Blanket statement.
you've just received, this is not uncommon for
Yep,
districts
I get
that go through this process at all.
And then when I look at the breakdown of the budgeting, level 1, level 2, level 3, you have 3.6 million for level 1 needs. So then I got a little lost because when I looked up at your breakdown of the categories, right, site, exterior, interior, I didn't see anything that was red. Everything was listed as fair.
Yeah,
or
so that's
fair
where
to
it gets
poor.
into the further breakdown when I had the little side matrix on the side where it said like site and then it had each part of the site. So the
Okay.
site being fair is just an average of all of those subsections
Got it.
of the site.
So
So when
that's
we have the
just the-
full PDF, you'll see the,
Where it's
20.
Explicit.
So in the granular
cells.
details,
Yes.
there are things that need to be addressed.
Yes, so those are mostly what we're sharing as the highlights.
So $3.7 million of, oh God, we have to do this now.
Not quite that bad.
Yeah, your
In the
building,
next 2 years.
the building's
Yes.
not, nothing's falling down or anything, right? We're
Yes.
still good to open up next year.
We're
The
safe.
Kids are
It's-
out,
they're
thankfully,
safe.
right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
more of a, we recommend that you look at doing this soon so that you don't get a desperate phone call
Yeah.
saying something
bad
went
has
wrong.
happened.
We don't have
Yeah.
heat. Yeah.
Yes,
Okay. Thank you.
yes, that's a great question.
And this is just for Glen Hills.
This is
Yes.
just for Glen Hills, yes.
If we have to do this 2 more times.
It's a lot of money.
A lot of money. There's a lot of square footage in site here as well.
So maybe just to kind of put this back in the context of why we do these first 2 steps, right? So this is purely looking at the existing state. It's not projecting forward. So when we go down that path and we think about what is it we want our buildings to do, what is it we want them to deliver to our students, we may say I'm fairly confident we will have conversations about significant changes, particularly here, right? Like we're gonna talk about this right now. The egg crate floor plan that we now have here with our classrooms, we're gonna have to change, right? We're gonna have to talk about changing it. And when we talk about making those changes to make them great educational spaces, a lot of that's, yeah, there it is. A lot of that stuff is gonna fall out as part of those projects. And Mike is absolutely right. I think we'd all like to make improvements to these facilities to make them really, really good assets to the community. We don't know that the community is ever going to support them. We hope they do. But if they don't, or there's a time lag to get to that point, we still have to have those maintenance items on the radar, right? So anyway, you're gonna see this data as we go through this process kind of pop back up, and it's gonna get kind of sliced and diced and reapportioned as we look at different ways to move forward.
At the very lowest level, we want to make sure that the facilities department has a good, solid 10-year plan of maintenance and knows what's coming up.
Yeah, right. Okay, but aside from nuts and bolts, we also have to look at how are these buildings working functionally for their purpose, and that's the educational space adequacy. And when you get into this long report, we go through all of our maintenance items. We're going to start to look at this, and in a nutshell, there are really three things we're looking at educational space adequacy. One is what are the numbers? What is the functional capacity of this building? How many kids, given the number of teaching stations that we have available to us, how many kids can we put in this building? And we're going to look at that two ways. One is a target capacity, so kind of like where is a good comfortable number, and what is a hypothetical maximum capacity, which is not real, but is an important number for us to know. It's the number of students that we could accommodate if you could have the perfect schedule. You could fill every section in this building exactly to the maximum number of students. How many kids would we have? We know that's not real for scheduling purposes. That's why we have a target. We'll talk about that in a minute. Then we actually have to look at our existing spaces and start to analyze, are these spaces adequate for supporting the curriculum and the services that are here today? So are these buildings meeting our today state? Yes or no? And what are those shortcomings that may be there? And then the third piece is starting to look forward, right? Because we have this time issue with buildings. We only get to do this and build facilities every few decades, right? So we have to think about what is coming down the road, and if there is a discussion about making a major investment in changing these facilities, how can we best accommodate things that we don't even know yet? So what is the vision? Where are we going as a community, and how can we create flexible spaces that can meet things that maybe aren't even happening here yet today, but give this board, give this administration, give future leaders flexibility to kind of grow and adapt and change within the facility. So that's kind of what we're looking at in this
Can I ask a
section.
question about that?
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be too detailed, but how do you forecast what schools might need in 10 years? Like that sounds like a prediction.
You can't.
Especially.
You can't.
Okay, but you're saying we're going to.
We're going to anticipate. We're going to anticipate flexibility. What we do with that flexibility, we don't know. So what I mean by that, that wall behind you is solid brick. So if 10 years from now, something needs to happen behind that wall, this is a really hard wall to modify. You can do it, but it's going to be expensive, right?
Okay.
So we are going to try to think about how we can inject into these facilities ways to modify and adapt space usage without requiring you to bring in masons.
Yes. Okay.
That's kind of what we're trying.
Something maybe that didn't happen in 1860.
Flexibility and adaptability of the space. So
Making
that-
sure we don't dial you into one pedagogy that may not stay forever.
Got it.
Like open concept.
I was a product of open classroom. Come on.
It
was awesome back then.
One success.
Thank you.
All right, let's go to the next one.
Okay, sorry.
No worries, no worries. So back to the kind of the numbers. So it's important for us to one.
Sorry.
Okay, we need information.
I don't understand it. I'm a boomer.
So what's really important to understand, we're calculating capacity of the variables that go into this equation, and one of those is how many students per classroom are we limited by either by practice or by policy within the district. So when we're looking at a building here, so we're in the third through eighth grade range, our policy is 25 students. That's kind of our maximum limit per classroom. And then when I talked about that target capacity versus the maximum capacity, a theoretical maximum, to dial down from the theoretical to what's really a practical planning number, we apply, and this is a national standard, an 85% utilization for a middle school environment. So that's trying to anticipate those scheduling inefficiencies, right? You never have a perfect schedule. You have lots of moving parts within a middle school. And it also anticipates that your enrollment numbers do fluctuate a little bit over time. So you would never plan a building or design a building to a maximum number, which would give you no wiggle room for the realities of student flow throughout the day and throughout the years within the building. Here are your floor plans. We're going to walk this thing, and when I say 8th grade, I think you guys know what I mean. Our octagons that were once upon a time an open concept school that got divided into classrooms, which is probably the unique thing in this building. How do we fix and address that situation? So right now we have 27 core classrooms. Those are our learning stations. So we calculate our capacity. That's the other variable that we're looking at. How many learning stations are here within the building? Just because we like charts and graphs, this is what your enrollment versus capacity, target, and max looks like over time. So there has been a slight decline, but you're somewhat level over the last couple of years. You're under that target capacity, which isn't a bad thing. That means we do, just the physical space of this today, we have some wiggle room to think about reassigning spaces within the building and doing some other things while still servicing all the students that are currently here in the building. And then this is just what our enrollment looks like in the past. We're currently sitting about 492, 10-year highs about 557, with a target capacity of 574. So again, we have some flexibility within these walls. And then 3 themes, I think Devin's going to kind of jump from here. 3 themes as we look at challenges within this building where we're maybe coming up short. Accessibility, we've already touched on a couple of times. Flexibility, how do we start to use spaces differently, and how do spaces accommodate or not accommodate myriad activities that now happen in a modern learning environment. And then spaces for support. There are so many different things and services that happen now within our schools that just didn't happen when these buildings were built. So it's unfortunate, but it's really common that we have services, interventionists, specialists that are working out of closets or nooks, crannies that they're there because that's all we've got, right? Because those services didn't happen.
Yep. So it's that support for the students as well as the staff in the building also.
What is that a picture of?
That's a calm or de-escalation space that's in a storage room.
In our building?
That is in this building.
A calm or de-escalation space. Abstract.
Is that a urinal that's been covered?
No,
That's
there's original sinks to the building that were very large. For some reason, it kind of looks like a hair washing sink almost, right? But without the little lip cut out.
Students go in there.
Yeah, so that's a soft cushion space, yeah, we can recenter and move on with our day. So flexibility, as Nick mentioned, to adapt to evolving pedagogy. That accessibility to all spaces is what we've talked about, that physical connection, but also the accessibility to have a classroom or a learning studio that is void of disruption from others potentially traveling through it. Next, oh, perfect. What we're talking about tonight is not just based on our experience. While it is rooted in that, it is based on the conversations that we've had with the leadership team. It is based on the conversation that we've had with building administration here at Glen Hills, as well as our open house conversations that we've had with staff in the staff lounge a few weeks ago. So yeah, and the survey. So this isn't just us sharing what we've seen, but this is also what we've heard and how we interpret that and bring that back and share it with you. So first thing to consider is, we're reviewing classroom against a modern standard. So a modern standard classroom has access to natural daylight and views. It's acoustically separate from its neighbors and the corridor. It's thermally comfortable. With adapting or evolving pedagogy, we need multiple fronts of a classroom, not just one, as we're looking to recenter or provide more instruction as we're in a small group. It's also got furniture that allows that adaptability of the space and doesn't become cumbersome. and distracting when we're moving around. It's also got a square foot kind of standard for and a regularized shape for a classroom space. Go ahead for the next one.
The average square footage of our classrooms now.
So that's a very nice
And it
segue.
wasn't in the presentation.
It was not. I got a
Okay,
whole
okay, I
lot of
just wanted
notes.
to question, okay, just check it,
I-
if it's coming
I
up.
work from a lot of notes.
Okay, okay, if it's
well,
coming, don't worry about it.
While the classroom spaces are slightly oddly shaped, right, just because of the open concept getting infilled, and Nick mentioned egg crate, which I kind of think about before.
Like that?
The inner classrooms are about 940 square feet. So they are well sized, especially when you think about that 25-to-1 student teacher ratio. The outer classrooms are larger than that. They are 1,140 square feet, or about in that range. So we have some larger classrooms around the perimeter with smaller classrooms in between. With the building being originally open concept, right, when the walls were put in, that was a big step up for the learning environments in this building, but still not to a standard of what we would need moving forward, what we really should have. Right now, sound just goes right through the ceiling tile and right down on the other side, or in some cases, kind of right through the wall. We really want to make sure that we're limiting distractions. One of those distractions, obviously, is also just students traversing in and out those inner classrooms while lacking the same amount of square footage as the outer ones. Kids pass during passing time, but kids also need to use the bathroom. They need to go to an interventionist. They need to go to the office. They need to go somewhere for some reason, and they're going right through that other learning space. Also within those, could you flip it? Also within the classrooms, our outer rooms, they have the ability, with that extra square footage, they have that little notch, 4 of them on the outside walls, as a small group or intervention type space. That's a great opportunity for a different type of instruction or support within those classrooms that they can receive from their teachers, a para, or another individual. Also, the outer classrooms have access and ability for daylight, where the inner rooms don't. Now, daylight, I say that, and I went to a middle school that had even less daylight to classroom spaces than this one. I would love to have a window like that, but still, it's 2 feet wide by 3 feet tall. That's it, and that's it. And there's, I mean, you can see in the picture there on the bottom left. I mean, I think that's what I can say for that. So some of the furniture in the room, we're gonna see it's stuff that we all sat on. While there is some more flexible or furniture that we can more easily move, there are still some rooms that have the connected desk and chair. If we move on to performing arts spaces, the proximity of those with the lower level on the left highlighting the band room, but we also have orchestra and choir. On the upper level, we have world music, which is up by 7th and 8th grade. The proximity of the spaces limits staff collaboration as well as shared resources. We think about accessibility of all of the spaces. I might be able to get into the room, but am I going to play drums? Well, now we got to move drums to the front. How is that kind of an access and accessibility working? Again, the tiers just make for a static space that aren't able to adapt to meet the accessibility needs. Also, lack of daylight to each of those spaces. And then as we think about the proximity of our world music, very close to 7th and 8th grade classrooms, as well as the science rooms, we need to consider acoustics within those spaces due to their adjacency as well. This slide focuses on student support, and I'll also call it professional support. We have one conference room, one kind of dedicated conference room in this entire building. We have a staff collaboration and workroom that are just way too close to the loudest portions of our building. Staff are commonly using the staff collaboration workspace when students are out at lunch. That proximity is a major challenge. Classrooms aren't outfitted with standard casework, leading to staff storage concerns as well as just truly cluttered classrooms. It's to no fault of the teaching staff. They just haven't been outfitted with casework, as you're seeing in the bottom left-hand picture, that can support a standard classroom's needs. When we think about student support, accessibility and flexibility of the right type of space is needed, right? You see that picture of that calm room. Special ed occurs in full-size classrooms that still lack that acoustical privacy or the opportunity to be uninterrupted with still people traveling maybe to another special ed space deeper in the floor plate. Special ed really in this building, right? It's got a home, but it's never truly been designed. It fits in a space that it needs to because that's what we have. But it's never been uniquely designed or appropriate to the space that it's truly trying to support. So again, I just hit on some highlights. We are going to jump on a facility tour. We're going to walk pretty quick.
And actually, our notes say run.
It does say run.
I'm gonna warm up now.
All right, stretch.
Good stretch. I'm glad everyone wore good shoes.
Good to see you too.
See you again. The last item of new business is appointment of delegates and representatives to committees. So I would just like to propose this as a like I can have one like a slate. Yep, I just want to do a slate. So I would propose that Karn be our CISA representative, that Ben be our WASB representative, that Carla be our foundation representative, and that I be the CISA. No, Southwestern Wisconsin Schools Alliance. And then I guess Andy could possibly, we could tap him to be a backup for any, convention or something like that. So, is there any discussion?
Anything except Carlo Foundation? That's it for me?
Yeah.
Yes.
And so if there are no objections to that, then I think those will be the appointments. All right, unanimous consent, and then a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Danielle. El Jefe.